Okay, so being able to choose a suitable research topic is an important skill to have for any master's degree students. Not only is the difference between writing a good paper and falling flat on your face, it's imperative if you want the process to run smoothly. So the importance of writing a good paper can lead students to feel an enormous and looming weight hanging over their heads as time passes. However, if you know a few crucial steps, choosing the right research topics can be quick, easy, and even fun. So number one, I think that we need to do is brainstorm some research topic. You need to brainstorm. You need to select a topic right after brainstorming. Get a super specific, because of course in internet we could able to get a lot of information or data related to what we wanted to research on. Then define your topic as a question. Once you have a specific topic, you now need to define it is a question that will help you with the context of your paper. So if you choose a topic, you need of course to understand that right after research your topic more, create an outline is also important. Okay, so to give us more details, let us play a video presentations on how we'll be able to choose a research topic for thesis or dissertation. This will actually 7 steps done by grad coach who are actually very particular with research because right now, may I suggest everyone that you may start doing your research topic also. Post your proposed title in our chat groups, FB Messenger group, for me to react or to approve your title or to give a more researchable topics, based on your ideas, based on your proposed title. Okay.
Research topic for your thesis or dissertation in the shortest amount of time. Plus, I'm going to tell you how you can get free feedback and critique on your research topic idea from the Grad Coach team. Hey guys, welcome to another episode of Grad Coach TV. My name is Derek, and today we're going to be looking at how to find and how to evaluate and ultimately how to choose a solid research topic for your dissertation or thesis. We're going to be talking about a 7-step process that we've used successfully with hundreds, if not thousands, of students here at Grad Coach. And if you follow this process step by step, I have no doubt that you're going to find a really, really good research topic to work with, and that research topic is going to be the smart choice for your dissertation or thesis. This video is based on an extract from our dissertation ebook, which you can download absolutely free of charge. I'll include the link below this video. And you might also be interested in some of the other dissertation and thesis related videos. We've got videos on how to write a research proposal, how to write a literature review, and pretty much everything that you'll need to get through the dissertation and thesis process. So we've got a playlist on that. You can just visit our YouTube channel. I'll include the link below this video again. So without any delays, let's jump right into it. Right, so the very first step of finding a solid, viable, functional research topic is that you need to familiarize yourself with the basic research process. Now, what I mean by the basic research process is that you need to understand things like research problems, research questions, literature review, fieldwork methods such as surveys and questionnaires and focus groups, methodologies such as qualitative, quantitative, and mixed method methodologies. Now, this might sound like I'm putting the cart before the horse somewhat, but it is really important that before you start running down a path of inquiry looking at potential topics, it's really important that you understand the big picture of how research works and the essential components to pulling off credible research. If you Don't understand these things, if you pursue the idea before you understand the research process, what you're going to do ultimately is waste a lot of time pursuing ideas that simply aren't viable, pursuing ideas that have already been extensively researched, pursuing ideas that you want to execute in a certain way, but it's just not practical, it's just not rigorous enough for the requirements of your school. So it is really important to first understand the core concepts, the basic concepts of research. Now, you definitely don't need to have an in-depth understanding, but you do need to have a basic understanding. So when we talk about things like research problems and research design and methodologies and so forth, that you understand what we're talking about there. So step one is get that under your belt, have a basic understanding of how research works. Your university should provide you with a textbook or other resources to guide you in that respect, but failing that, there's loads of information online. A little Google will provide a lot of information. You can also check out the Grad Coach blog. We've got a section dedicated to academic research, which I'll include the link to below this video. So step one, make sure that you understand the basics of the research process, and then we can move on to step two. So once you've got a basic understanding of core research principles and the basics of the research process, the next essential step is to make sure that you really understand what it is that your university requires from you for your specific research project. Now, this might sound pretty obvious, but I can't tell you the number of times I've seen students run down a path, spend so many hours, days, weeks, months, entertaining some research idea, only to find out that for some reason that's not allowed by their university. So it's really, really important to start with the core requirements, understand what the essentials are from your university, and understand what the deal breakers might be in terms of topics that are not allowed. At a minimum, you want to make sure that you understand the following. Firstly, the originality requirements. In other words, how unique does your research need to be? Now, this will vary a lot depending on your degree and what sort of course you're enrolled in, but you need to get clarity on what originality and uniqueness requirements they have for your specific research project. The second thing you need to look at is topic restrictions. In other words, what areas are you allowed to research? Do they need to link to certain modules, or do you pretty much have free form in terms of what you can choose as long as it's within the domain of your degree? Another thing you need to understand is the data requirements. Specifically, does your university require that you have primary research, that you have secondary research, or do they require both? Another really important thing that you need to understand is what are the methodology requirements? In other words, do they have specific requirements about whether you need to do a quantitative study, whether you need to do a qualitative study? Perhaps they have a requirement or they encourage you to do mixed methods. So it's really important to understand what are the expectations there. And the last really important thing that you need to understand is ethical requirements. So all universities will have some sort of ethical framework and some sort of ethical standards and guidelines which everyone needs to adhere to. And so you need to understand what those are and what that means in terms of limitations on your fieldwork. It might mean that you can only interview certain people, or that you can only ask certain types of questions, or that you need clearance for certain types of work or areas of research. So it's really important to understand what are those ethical requirements and what do they mean in terms of restricting you. So as you can see, it's really important to understand what does the university need from you, or what are the restrictions that they put in place. Otherwise, you can spend a huge amount of time ultimately to land up in a dead end. The lesson here is know the rules of the game before you play. And with that, we can move on to step 3. So now that you understand the rules of the game, you have license to start looking at potential research areas. The approach that we take here is to start really, really broad and then narrow that down until you get to a set of potential research topics that we can then evaluate. So we'll get to that later. But the starting point for now is to identify areas that interest you. So what you're looking for here is areas of your studies or modules that you've done that interest you. For example, in an MBA context, it might be something like social media marketing. It might be something like leadership. It might be something like innovation or innovative cultures. Whatever areas, broad areas, have interested you as you've worked through your degree, make a list of those broad interest areas, and they don't need to be at all pointed or specific. As you can see in the example that I just gave you, we're not asking any specific question at this point in time. We're just saying, what are the areas that you've worked through your studies, and you've said, wow, I really like that, that's really interesting, I'd like to know more about it. Now the caveat here is that your interest areas need to be areas that are intellectually appealing to you, that you have a curiosity about, but not that you have some sort of emotional charge or some sort of attachment or some preconceived notion about. Because ultimately, if you take something that you really hold strong beliefs about and you go and delve into researching that, you're going to bring all your biases with you. You're going to bring subjectivity to your research, which is really not welcome in an academic context. What you're looking for here is to go into an area of research with an open mind and to ask questions and be comfortable with whatever answers you get. So it's really important to choose something that interests you, choose something that's going to keep you motivated through this long process, but don't choose something that is emotionally charged. While you're thinking about your broad interest areas, there's two things that you might want to be thinking about at the same time. The first thing is faculty support. In other words, for whichever research areas that you're identifying, are there faculty, full-time faculty that would be interested, that have a research interest in that area, that could potentially support you, could potentially be your supervisor? Generally, it's smart to choose a topic, or at least choose an area that your university has good support for, because that person will be able to guide you, they'll be able to give you feedback, and they'll be able to assess the quality of your work as well a lot better. So you do ideally want to be looking at, can you line up your areas of interest with the areas of interest and held by the faculty? So that's one component. The other thing that you want to think about at this stage, and again, this is just a nice to have and something to consider, is where you want to take your career post-graduation. So the dissertation or the thesis is a nice opportunity to build some specialism in terms of whatever direction you want to go in your career. So for example, if you are wanting to pursue, if you're studying a marketing degree, but you are wanting to pursue something digitally oriented or online marketing oriented, then your dissertation is a nice opportunity to just go and to zoom into that little niche, so that you have a unique perspective when you start going for interviews, and you can bring something unique to the table by way of this research that you've already done. So those are just two things to consider while you think about these broad areas of interest. Don't stress too much about this right now. As I say, we just start really, really broad, and then we'll narrow it down according to criteria. So at this stage, pen down a few of your interest areas, and then let's move on to step 4. Right, now that you have a good idea of your broad interest areas, it's time to start narrowing that down. It's time to start narrowing it down into a more niche area or more niche set of areas. And the best way to do that, the most efficient way to do that, is to have a look at past dissertations by other students at your university, and ideally within your same program, so within an MBA program or an MSc program, for example. So the first step is to head over to the dissertation library or dissertation database for your university, and use your research areas, your broad areas that you just identified. Use those as keywords to search for dissertations in the database. And at this point, just pile all the dissertations that you can find, pile them into a folder, and keep them for review. And the way that you're going to review them is quite simple. Now, obviously, you're not going to go and read a bunch of dissertations from start to end. What you're going to do is you're going to do a skim of some important sections to get the information you need. So I would recommend that you look at the title, because the title should be quite descriptive if it's a good title. Have a look at the executive summary or the abstract, because that gives you a full idea of what the research is all about. about, and then have a look at the introduction chapter, because that gives you a good idea of how they came to go from a broad topic and to justify that down into something, or a broad research area, and to justify that down into a tighter topic. As you're looking at these dissertations or theses, you need to ask yourself a few questions. So the first question you want to ask yourself is, what kind of topics did these dissertations cover, and how did they turn these topics into questions? So you might want to look at just roughly for each dissertation, what was the topic and what were the research questions. Then importantly, how broad or how narrow were these topics? What does this tell you about the requirement from the school in terms of how narrow and how niche they want you to go? Also importantly, how original were the topics? Were they really groundbreaking, or was it just a sort of localized twist on well-established theory? And then importantly, how well justified were these topics? In other words, were the topics really important for society, or at least for the area, the field, or were they just nice to knows? Because this gives you a good idea of what your university expects in terms of justification for a topic. Now, I can't tell you how many dissertations you need to review, how many theses you need to review, but I would say that you need to keep going until you have narrowed your handful of research areas down into a handful of more niche areas. In other words, until you've gone and taken those 4 or 5 broad areas and narrowed them down into something more specific. Or perhaps you decided to scrap some of the areas because you found stuff that was more interesting. But you want to at least walk away from this process with 5 areas that are more nichely focused. For example, if your broad interest area in the beginning was something like social media marketing, then you might have narrowed that down to Facebook marketing or YouTube marketing. If your broad interest area in the beginning was reputation management, you might have narrowed that down to consumer trust or consumer trust building. In other words, the important thing is that you have gone and narrowed down from this broad interest area to something more specific, something that has a body of theory that you can go and look at meaningfully, which is the next step. Right, now that you've narrowed your thinking down from a broad area to a more niche area, the next step is to hit the literature. In other words, hit the existing research, the journal articles, perhaps the textbooks, and get a good feel for the state of knowledge in the interest areas that you have, in these more niche interest areas. And the objective here really is just to understand, where is the current research, what does the existing body of knowledge have to say about these interest areas. And ultimately what you're looking for is to find the gaps, is to find the little areas of the puzzle, the pieces of the puzzle that haven't been filled in yet, because those will be ideal topics. So right now what you're looking for is to get into the literature and understand, what does the literature say about my areas of interest. So how do you do this? So the best starting point is to head back to your modules, head back to your coursework, and use that as a starting point for finding relevant journal articles. And the way you do that is go have a look at whichever parts of your modules spoke about these more refined interest areas that you have, and see which journal articles they referenced and go and pick those out. In addition to this, you can head over to Google Scholar and you can use your keywords or your refined interest areas. You can use those as keywords in Google Scholar, and I'd say pick out the top 5 most relevant articles for whichever area you're interested in, for each area you're interested in. And you should also have a look for any sort of annual review or any sort of recent combined literature review type articles when you're looking on Google Scholar, because these will provide you with a really big picture view of the state of knowledge. So now you've got a whole lot of articles, ideally 5, 6, 7 high quality articles for each of the interest areas that you narrowed down to in the previous step. And what you're going to do with these is you're just going to skim read through them. So what you're looking for again is the executive summary, or in a journal context it will be the abstract. Have a look at the introduction, and you can have a look at the conclusion, and that should give you a good idea of what each article is about and what are the key issues that they're raising through each section. If you manage to get your hands on a literature review type article that provides an overview of all of the literature, then do spend the time actually reading through all of that, because that is going to give you a really good view of the full state of knowledge, at least at the time of print of that article. Another area that you want to have a look at the end of each article is the reference list. So if you find one article that is really interesting and really relevant and is covering an area of the theory that really interests you, then ideally what you want to look at that reference list and then pick out a few more articles that article is referenced and go and pull those out. And so this is a process of snowballing, finding more articles through articles. And ultimately what you want to land up with is about 20 articles for each interest area that you have, for each niche interest area that you have, because this number, it's hard to put a firm number to it, but if you've got the top 20 most relevant and recent articles, you'll have a decent idea of what the theory has to say about each area. So spend the time in the research or in the literature review, and then once you've done that, once you have a good understanding of where things are at, then you can move on to the next step. Right, now that you are familiar with the literature for your interest areas, now that you understand what the current state of the research is in whatever areas you're interested in, you can finally get to the important part of finding potential research topics. In other words, we're now finally narrowing down from broad to niche to actual topic. But how do you do that? Well, there's 3 techniques that I'm going to show you that are really, really effective at finding suitable topics. So the first technique for finding suitable topics, finding original topics, is to utilize what we call the FRIN, or F-R-I-N, and that's an acronym for further research is needed. What I mean by this is that within most journal articles, if not all journal articles, towards the end, they'll generally have some discussion about the need for further research on that specific area. So if you're looking at current articles, in other words, fairly recent articles, if you look at that FRIN section, if you assess what they state as being needed in terms of further research, you're going to have a source of really, really useful research topic ideas. Now, the upside to this approach is that provided the articles you're looking at are recent, the upside is that this is going to be really, really original research in terms of the opportunity at hand. If a recent article by a reputable researcher is saying that there's a need for research over here, then you can be pretty sure that that is genuinely an original and an authentic need. So the upside is originality. The downside is that these might not really be areas that interest you. You might find that the areas that they propose for further research are just not up your alley, or you might just have more practical limitations that they require some sort of methodology, or they require some sort of context that you just don't have access to. So there's pros and cons to this approach, but if originality is really important, then the FRIN is a fantastic starting point. And if you have a good bundle of articles that are recent, you're going to have many, many FRIN opportunities just kind of sitting on a platter there. So make sure you look at those. Right, the second technique that you can use to find good topics is to assess whether the existing research is relevant and suitable within a specific context. So what I mean by that is that you can take a body of theory that has already been pretty well researched or just moderately researched, and you can assess whether that's relevant within a certain context, such as a certain country, or within a certain industry, or within a certain demographic group, socio-demographic conditions. You can assess whether or not the existing theory is relevant there. And if there is any question mark about whether it is relevant there, then that is a topic that is potentially worth considering. So, for example, you might take a topic like consumer trust, and consumer trust is something that's extensively researched, but you might say, well, consumer trust has been researched extensively, but largely in an American or a first world country context, and for certain types of products or for certain types of services. So you might make an argument that there is a need for research into consumer trust within a third world or developing country context, and for a specific type of service or specific industry. In other words, you'd be putting a unique spin, you'd be putting a different contextual lens onto existing research. So this can be very effective when you're interested in an area where there is a good deal of research already, but just nothing that's been done close to home, close to a population that you have access to. An important point to make with this is that there needs to be a legitimate reason as to why the existing research might not be valid or might not be relevant in a certain context. So you can't just say, well, it's been done extensively, but it hasn't been done in this country. If this country is much the same as the countries that it has been done in, then there isn't really an argument that this is essential research. So you need to find a valid argument for why the existing research might not be valid. It might be something like, well, there's cultural differences. It might be that the socioeconomic conditions are very different, and that impacts decision making by the consumer and impacts trust. Might be that there's just different belief systems, etc., etc. It might be that there's a different societal structure. Whatever the case may be, you need to have some sort of argument as to why this unique context might not hold the existing research as valid. So that's a useful approach that you can use. The third approach that you can use is far less structured, and the third approach is basically just brainstorming and mind mapping, and just allowing yourself to have a bit of uncensored free thinking in terms of potential topics. So what you will often find is that once you've immersed yourself in the literature, once you've immersed yourself in the state or the current state of the research, that can just stimulate a lot of free thinking. And so if the other two methods haven't really brought anything for you, what you can do is you can just sit down and you can brainstorm and you can mind map just a bunch of potential directions that the theory might be able to go in. And what you do there is you write down your stack of ideas from that session. Don't restrict your thinking, just put it down on paper, come up with a list of ideas, and then sit down with that list and go back to the research and see whether that thing's been covered. So that's just a third technique that really isn't very structured. I can't give you much direction on, but I'm giving you license to say, well, you can just think freely about this. You don't need a specific systematic approach to all of it. The only caveat is whatever ideas you come up with there, make sure you return to the literature and see whether or not those ideas have been covered. Very often what you think is unique thinking on your part is actually being covered somewhere else already. So you've got to go back and validate those ideas. So using one of these techniques, or ideally a combination of these techniques, you should be able to come up with a much more refined list of specific research topics. In other words, we've gone from broad area of interest to niche area of interest to a specific topic. And hopefully you've got a nice list of them. And the next step is to take that list, or to take those topics and to turn them into specific research questions. Now, the purpose of turning them into research questions is to, again, get really, really narrowed down, to get specific about, okay, so what are we actually asking? So what does that look like? Well, let me give you an example. So let's say through the techniques that we just discussed, you've come to one of your topics being consumer trust in robo-advisors in the UK, for example. So if consumer trust in robo-advisors is your potential topic, then you want to refine this even further to a set of specific research questions. And these might be, one, what are the key drivers of UK consumer trust in robo-advisors? And two, how do these drivers vary in impact between demographic groups? So notice how we've gone from even a topic which is quite narrow already, consumer trust in robo-advisors. With the research questions, we go even more specific. We say, well, what are the drivers of this trust? And two, how does that vary between demographic groups? So it's getting really, really specific about, this is the topic and these are the specific research questions. So you want to go through this process for whichever topics you've identified, list out the topic, and then list out perhaps 2 or 3 research questions, so you're getting really, really clear about what it is that you are going to be potentially focusing on. So once you've got a good list of potential topics, nice narrow topics, and their associated research questions, you are ready to move on to the final step, which is evaluating the topic ideas. So you finally got hopefully a good list of potential topics and their associated research questions. And now it's time to sit down and to evaluate these in a systematic fashion so that you can pick the most suitable topic. And the key is to do this systematically, not to go and just run with whichever one you are most drawn to, because there's very, very important considerations that we haven't looked at just yet to assess which is the best potential topic. So let's have a look at that. For each topic that you've got, you're going to evaluate them against the following criteria. And I'd suggest that you create a little Excel spreadsheet and you assess a score for each of these metrics, or for each topic, give a score to each of the following points. So the first one is originality. So in other words, is this topic sufficiently original, at least according to your university's requirements? Are you going to meet their criteria? So this is why it's really important to, right in the beginning, the first or second step was to understand the university's criteria, and also the other dissertations that you looked at should give you an idea of originality requirements. The second thing you want to look at is importance. In other words, is this topic of real significance, or is it just a nice to know? Is it going to make a difference in whichever industry it's involved in? Is it significant, or is it really just an intellectual curiosity? Again, the requirement from the university side will vary, and that's why it's really important to understand what they require in terms of the importance of any given topic. The next criteria to assess against is the availability of literature. In other words, is there enough literature to base your investigation on, but not too much that it's overdone? What you're looking for here is a sweet spot. You don't want something that is so radically new that there isn't really enough literature to base a literature review on, which will be a requirement in your dissertation or thesis. So you want something that isn't too new, but also that isn't overdone. And if it is overdone, you're going to need a really good justification in terms of why your specific context makes it worthwhile doing again. The next thing to evaluate on is data access. In other words, are you going to have access to the data that you need to answer your key questions? Are you going to be able to get the information that you need? Very often this is overlooked, and then you run down a path and end up really, really stuck in the middle of your dissertation with a data access issue. The next thing to consider is resource access. So do you have a need for things like lab equipment, or do you have a need for additional resources, perhaps even a cash budget? Will you have access to that? Think about what other resources you might need in order to really pull off this specific piece of research. Another consideration is your data collection capabilities. So what I mean by this is, if you're going to do interviews, do you have the necessary people skills? Do you have a desire to sit and interview people? Is that something that you're comfortable with? Similarly, if you're going to collect quantitative data, do you have a way to do this? Do you have the means to actually collect the information and the data that you need? Linked directly to this is your analysis capabilities. So do you have the skills necessary to analyze the data, whether that's qualitative or quantitative data? And if not, will you get these skills? Or do you have the desire to go and learn how to run the numbers for statistical analysis? Do you have the desire to learn software for a qualitative analysis? Think about these capability restrictions that are in place. And then importantly, just personal attraction. So how excited are you by any given topic? Will addressing it add some value to your life? Perhaps will it add value to your career if you're going to use this as part of a career move? Will it help you build a skill that you've previously wanted, or an area of knowledge that you wanted? So consider just the personal attraction. That's essentially an overall component. So once you've scored all of your research topic ideas according to those criteria, tally them up, and very quickly you'll be able to see what your top 3 are. So you want to refine it down to top 3. You might want to just do a little logic check on that, see if your top 3 are actually topics that you quite like, and take your top 3 And the next step is to develop what we call an elevator pitch. In other words, a really quick summary of what it is that each topic is about, with the idea of selling someone on it. So in other words, think about selling a potential supervisor on approving your research. So you want to develop, for each of these top three, you want to develop an elevator pitch. An elevator pitch is essentially just one paragraph covering a few important points, which I'll discuss now. The first thing is, what will the study be about? That just needs to be one sentence. The second point is, why is this original? Again, just one sentence. The third is, why is this important? Again, just one sentence. And the fourth is how you plan to answer this question. In other words, what's your research design? One or two sentences, qualitative, quantitative, rough idea of how you'll be collecting and analyzing the data. So once you've done that, you're going to have a paragraph for each research topic idea, and that paragraph is really concisely going to convey the what, the why, and the how of each topic. Now, what do you do with these little paragraphs that you've created? Two things I would recommend. The first thing is, take that little paragraph and shoot it off to as many people as you can, perhaps some friends and family, perhaps some fellow cohort members, some fellow students, and get some feedback regarding which topic do they like the most, why do they like that, why is it appealing to them, and do they potentially see any problems in terms of the execution on that research. So that's going to give you just a good layman's perspective on the research. It's just going to give you an idea and some perspectives from people who are not specialists in the space. The second thing you can do, and a bit of a reward for having watched this far into the video, is you can take your elevator pitch and you can slap that straight into the comments below this video, and we'll get one of our PhD qualified research specialists from GradCoach to give you feedback on that idea. So that's something we would normally charge for, but we'll give you that absolutely free. Just drop it in the comments below. Importantly, please, it must be an elevator pitch. It must be covering the things we've discussed. Please don't put just half-baked ideas in the comments below. So do those two things, and you should have some really good feedback that you can use to inform your thinking. So once you got that feedback, give some thought to what it all means to you, and then make a decision. If you've got your top three, and your top three have made it through all those criteria that we've already gone through, if you've been honest with yourself and if you've done the work, chances are all three of them are pretty good ideas. So pick the one that appeals to you most and stick with it. You don't need to doubt it. You don't need to second guess it. If you followed all the steps, then you should have a really solid research idea. So pick it and then get onto your research proposal. So there you have it, a 7-step process, the 7-step process that we've used with hundreds of students at GradCoach, covering how to find and choose a really solid research topic for your dissertation or thesis. To recap on the 7 steps. So step 1 is get a basic understanding of research. Understand what the research process is about. Understand the terminology used in research. Step 2 is to get a really solid understanding of your university's requirements. What do they require in terms of originality, in terms of importance, in terms of restrictions, ethics, etc. Once you've got that, step 3 is to identify your broad interests. So this is just really starting at the top, starting with a broad, not at all specific area of interest. And the important thing to remember there is that it's something that you must have an intellectual curiosity about, but not something that's emotionally charged for you. Once you've got those broad interest areas identified, you've got to move on to reviewing the past dissertations and then use those to understand how other people have narrowed these down into niche areas. So you're going to go and narrow things down from broad to more niche. Once you've got your niche areas identified, step 5 is to go and review the literature, have a look at the literature in those areas, familiarize yourself with the current state of the research, understand what is going on, understand what the key arguments are, understand what's agreed on, what's disagreed on. And then once you've done that, you can go on and start identifying specific, clear, narrowed research topics and research questions using the 3 techniques that we discussed. And once you've got your research topics identified, you're going to go and systematically evaluate them using the criteria that we discussed earlier and cut those down to your top 3. Get your feedback from your friends, get your feedbacks by dropping your elevator pitch into the comments here, and then make a decision about which one you're going to go with. If you follow these 7 steps and put in the time and effort to do them right, there's no doubt in my mind that you will come out with a rock solid research topic. And then you can get on to writing your dissertation or thesis proposal. By the way, we have covered how to write a thesis or dissertation proposal in another video, so I'll link to that below this video.
Okay, so as you can see, on our review presentation, it also suggests that we need to study more about on review-related literature, specifically with our targeted topic. So, okay, so I think what you're going to do, number 1, what will be your expertise? It's also another consideration. Number 2, read a lot, review literature, previous master's degree output or doctorate degree output, same with your target title, it's very important. And you may seek advice, for those who are really in the field of research, and at the same time, for those who are who could able or already provide a thesis or a research related to your proposal. Okay?